All right, well, we are recording this, so maybe we kick off and give it a bit of a start, because there is lots to share with you today. Thanks so much for joining us. Mel and I are going to run you through some of the trends around social media and what we've been seeing. If you do have any questions, you'll see down the bottom there is a Q&A session. So if you just put your comments in there, Lauren is monitoring that. We will be recording this session, but we're very conscious that some of the slides that we've included are hot off the internet from social media marketing world, and we are very conscious of copyright. So we won't be distributing this broadly. We will send you the recording, but we do ask that you just keep it a little bit on the lowdown, because we haven't had time to change up all of the slides, given social media marketing world happened last week. So this has been a bit of a team effort, mostly pulled together by Loz and Mel. As you know, the whole team is kind of looking at digital and social media across the board. And we're super proud to be able to share some of our latest breaking news, that this week we've just been named as a finalist for Outstanding Professional Services in the Inner West Local Business Award. So thank you to all of our beautiful clients for allowing us to keep telling your stories and doing some great work, and nice to be recognised. So a couple of things to cover today. This landscape is obviously changing quite rapidly, as we alluded to last month in the social media seminar that we did around broader trends. Obviously, the landscape is evolving. There's always new features, new platforms to consider. The focus today very much will be on Meta, so Instagram and Facebook, and we'll explain why. And then we will touch on some of the other platforms, particularly LinkedIn, TikTok, Twitter, and look at a little bit of the future. And then importantly, to wrap up, I know that we talk about social media in our whips, and we kind of are having a dialogue about how this is evolving, but we've broken down a couple of things in terms of what this is meaning for your social media marketing, so that you can put together a couple of goals. The first thing I think is really important to acknowledge, though, is there is a lot of chatter at the moment about how much the landscape is evolving, how much things are changing, and what's kind of looking differently in this arena. We know that having been in the social media landscape for, over a decade, there's always evolutions, and we're dealing with listed companies that are continuing to evolve their products to make it relevant to their audiences. So whilst there's a lot of change going on at the moment, I just cast your mind back to the fact that we continue to have a lot of these dialogues as social media starts to change. We saw when Instagram came onto the equation in 2009 that things were evolving and people were jumping on that, and often there's a new shiny toy to be able to go after, and we saw that with the pandemic and some of the voice activation platforms. But we want you to understand that the fact that you're actually sitting in on this session today means that you're already ahead of the curve. What we're intending to do here is very much arm you with new tools and knowledge about how the platforms are evolving. And we've got you back here. We're looking at this, we're doing the research, and we're looking at how we can evolve these trends into your marketing. So it's an opportunity to be excited about the future and how we move forward. And whilst there is a lot of change and we're seeing things being done differently, the message that we've got for you is don't panic, because this has always been an ever-evolving landscape. So Mel's just going to take over here and have a bit of a recap on the things that have been working well, because for many of our clients, we have done this audit of 2022, and there's so much exciting stuff in your marketing campaigns that is working really well. And we wanted to kind of touch on that first before we kind of move on to the things to consider in future. So over to you, Mel.
Yeah, so exactly as Trish said, these are things that we shouldn't forget. So when we're looking at things like video, what we are seeing that's working are Reels, Facebook Lives, and to a degree, long format videos. However, when we talk about long format videos, what we are trying to communicate here is it's more of those how-to type videos, and it's often after we've amplified them to your existing audiences with that objective of video views. So that one does have a bit of a caveat there. In terms of photography of what is working well, it's that authentic content. So stock imagery is just not cutting it. We can't be purchasing images online. We need to be creating our own authentic content, which kind of feeds into that lifestyle imagery. So some lifestyle imagery is working, particularly if we're using things like GIFs by creating movement. And that almost feeds back into that video trend, because technically the algorithm would see a GIF as a video. And then finally, in terms of photography, those family and staff photos are working exceptionally hard. And this is almost like a little B step to that family and staff photography. So the content that does build authenticity does help with explaining the philosophies and the people behind your brand, and it does build trust. So when we're sharing family photos, some behind the scenes of at special events or award ceremonies or day-to-day work, it is resonating with your community. In terms of user-generated content or influencers, it is breathing fresh air into the grid. However, we are seeing this trend resonate better on Instagram versus Facebook. And when we're looking at other forms of media or creative that are working well, we are testing things. So we are looking at the length of copy. So there's multiple schools of thought that short is best or long is best. So we're testing both of those to make sure that we are kind of staying ahead of that curve and not falling behind if we're using long copy, but maybe it should be short, for example. Using things like graphics to explain unique selling points of a brand. So some examples here of what we have done previously in 2022 for Narada, as well as considering the history and using things like hashtags like Throwback Thursday or Flashback Friday. It's a trend that really does show how your brand or business has evolved over the years. So in terms of looking at our content pillars and why this is working really well for us, it's having that diversity of content. It's giving us the capabilities to reach different communities, to still keep your current fan base engaged by sharing multiple different facets of your brand. So that's things like blogs, product, people, your local area. It's all that sort of content that's helping us tick all those boxes. The other thing that we have seen in 2022 is that for some of the businesses that we have worked with, for those who have increased their ad spend, it's actually given us the capabilities to test and learn. It's given us that potential that we could split a campaign up between, say, a traffic campaign where we're driving traffic to the website or people to the website, or we might want to test whether or not an engagement ad was better. So that's actually given us that capability. And not only that, it's given us the possibility to test other social media platforms. So last year for some, we did dabble in Pinterest and we did see some really great results there. So essentially having that little bit of extra ad budget does allow us to test, trial, and further optimize. We also saw probably back in 2021, the rise of carousel ads or posts. So that's those fun ones that swipe across and each tile has a link to a different page on your website, or it might have the same one. And what we've seen from those carousel ads is that they're driving really strong Facebook traffic. So emphasis that it's working better on Facebook for traffic. However, on Instagram, we're seeing really strong engagement on these carousel ads, as well as a low cost per click. And it's probably because we're giving them multiple touch points to click on that ad. In terms of community management, it is working well for some, but we need to really reinforce that it is critical. So brands are now becoming more important. Brands are now more important to reach 24/7. And essentially, there's a lot of customers who look to your social media as a form of customer service. So they expect a pretty quick response, as if they had picked up the phone and had rung you. And unfortunately, it is a 24/7 beast. We have seen for some clients that Mastermind has taken that on as part of the retainer to really make sure that we're staying on top of that and keeping our customers happy. It also gives us the opportunity that if we are at the forefront of remaining engaged, that we are helping further the algorithm at seeing it as an engaging post. And it also means we're sharing content in a timely fashion. So obviously Instagram stories we know last for 24 hours. If we're not sharing them within that 24-hour window, they're a missed opportunity. So I'm going to hand over to Trish about what this all means.
So I guess the thing to think through here is that the reason we started on social media and, jumping on this trend back in 2007, the reason that you joined social media as a consumer, but also as a brand, is to stay social. So there's no surprise in these trends that it's the people, the connections, the useful tips that are actually cutting through in the feed. And we often talk about the role of social media in a broader digital ecosystem. So if you're a massive big brand like Coca-Cola, you would have other mediums that you can start to communicate your brand feel, look, and tone. For smaller brands, this is a really good way of bringing that awareness and the personal connections into the forefront. But it also means that we have to make sure that the other elements of the digital marketing mix, like your email, like your website, like the other touch points that you might have in your physical venue, are just as strong, because social can build a tribe, but other areas of your digital footprint will often be the part that converts. So worth thinking about how that looks. So let's just talk about what the landscape is obviously going to look like and how we're seeing social media evolve, because this is no longer a trend. This is something that consumers, regardless of age groups, are using, and they're utilizing on a really frequent basis. So where we talk about, not building our home on foreign soil, our website and our presence that we own still remains the most critical part of our owned brand activity, because we can control that. But social media plays a larger role in the landscape, because it's actually bringing people to the discovery point of where our brand sits. And, social media is beyond just being Facebook and YouTube. I think it's worth recognizing that the average consumer that is using social media, as we touched on in the Trends webinar, is on average using 7.2 different platforms, and they're using them in very different ways. So we need to think about that integration of the different mediums and how we use those as part of the mix.
Yeah, so as Trish mentioned, if we are seeing that most social media users are on 7 different platforms, it would be good to look at what those most used platforms are. So the most used is Facebook, which I don't think would come as a surprise, but that is actually closely followed by YouTube, and Instagram actually comes in 4th. That's not to say it doesn't have a role to play. It certainly does, and we are seeing growth on that platform, but it's really important that we're at the forefront of knowing what platforms people are on. So other ones we've highlighted here are TikTok and Pinterest, because they are ones that we should keep top of mind. When we actually look at okay, well, what age group is using which channel? It's really interesting to see that the older demographics are more inclined to be using Facebook, and the younger demographics are more inclined to use YouTube. It's also really interesting to note as well that people that are using TikTok, whilst we do assume that it is a younger user, there are older people who are still using TikTok. However, it is very difficult to actually reach those older people if that's what we're trying to achieve. So in terms of what's really important about all these different changes and how do we actually stay on top of that? So essentially that's where we're here to help. So as Trish mentioned, we've been virtually to Social Media Marketing World last week. We have other things that go on throughout the year, like subscribing to particular thought leaders within the social media space. We're also staying on top of following accounts such as the head of Instagram. So essentially we're letting you know that we are a pool of knowledge in terms of trying to be at the forefront of what is coming, what is working, and what's not. In terms of what could you do yourself, if you're keen to kind of stay abreast of what's happening, there are some platforms. So you could be using things like Meta's tool called Blueprint. So that helps you with latest updates, and there's some tutorials on how to use different aspects of the Meta platform. So Meta being Facebook and Instagram. LinkedIn and Pinterest also have similar tools tools. So these might be worthwhile checking out if you're keen just to kind of extend your own personal knowledge when it comes to social media.
Especially on just, touching on that LinkedIn piece from a professional services point of view. We're obviously talking a lot about, B2C marketing today, but from a B2B, from a relationship point of view, whether that's, looking for prospects or whether that is connecting with different venues that you might supply your wine to and talking to sommeliers, there's some really good materials on LinkedIn Learning. Lots of it is freely available, but it's a great way to kind of discover the LinkedIn platform, particularly from a B2B marketing point of view, because lots of the stuff we're going to talk about today is obviously consumer facing. But I know there's a couple of people that have joined us that are interested in social from a business perspective that's more B2B, and LinkedIn Learning would be the number one place that I would go and have a look at.
Yeah. So I think this is quite an important slide and one that I'd really like you to take away from. So engagement rates are decreasing across social media channels. However, the usage is increasing. But what I want you to really understand from this slide is what we now know as engagement is changing. It's no longer necessarily about how many likes or comments you get on a post. Engagement includes website traffic, watching video content. If you are an Instagram user and you really enjoy watching reels, think about out of 10 videos, how many of them do you just watch and how many of them are you actually liking or commenting on? You're still engaging with the content because you're watching it. However, the like button is actually a bit harder to find when you're in that Reels format. Plus, it's on the opposite side of the screen compared to if you were scrolling through your feed where you'd normally find it on the left-hand side. Other things to consider, and we've mentioned this previously in other webinars, are Instagram stories or Facebook stories. That sort of content is a lot harder for systems to be able to track replies, comments, and things like that. So we need to keep in mind that whilst engagement rates are decreasing, I want you to think that traditional engagement rates are decreasing in terms of comments and likes. What is increasing is video views and people engaging with your Instagram or Facebook stories.
And I think that's a good thing to think about. Sometimes this is where you need to take away just the comments on a post and dig a bit deeper, because particularly when you then go and look at Google Analytics, sometimes you could provide a really useful piece of content that gets a really high click-through rate and they land on your website and spend a long time on your website. But that's actually the activity you want them to take. And that's not going to necessarily reflect on someone saying, oh, thank you for that amazing piece of content. They just don't respond that way. So we're looking at the metrics through a little bit of a different lens.
Yeah. So I'm going to hand back to Trish to kind of move into this next phase about whether or not Meta matters anymore.
So for those of you who don't know what we're talking about with Meta, Meta is the new name for Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and the whole entity of products that sit under what used to be known as Facebook. And obviously things have changed a lot since Facebook was launched. And there's a lot of news in the press around, does Facebook still have a role? So a lot of scaremongering, I guess you could say, in terms of, is Facebook dead? And it was really interesting listening to Michael Stelzner from Social Media Marketing World, and we've attended this conference for nearly a decade now, either in person or virtually. And he says, look, every time we come to talk about Facebook, there's always this conversation about, is it dead? But actually what we're talking about is more of how has it evolved? Because once again, as a listed entity, we need to understand that the platform of Meta continues to evolve as new competitors pop up, as consumers are behaving very differently online, as new technology starts to evolve. So yes, there's absolutely been some changes in Meta, but when you have a look at the performance, they are still reaching, as of the 1st of February, more than 3.7 billion people each month across their family of apps. And on Facebook alone, they're reaching 2 billion people daily from an active user perspective. So, this is far from dead. And if anything, Facebook is growing at a very different rate to what it has in the past. To give a little bit of perspective, you'll see this is the daily internet users up here. And under that, you can see the Facebook users that continue to grow. Consumers are using it differently depending on their age group. So look at how my kids are kind of using Facebook. Anyone over 13 obviously can have a presence. They use the platform very differently to what I would use it, to how my mum also uses it. So different generations are on there and they're engaging very differently. Now, I thought this was really useful to be able to share with you. Not long ago, actually a few weeks ago, Facebook for the first time produced some information and published this transparency report that in America showed us how there has been an evolution of users on the feed. So this is looking at the Facebook feed and how consumers are using it. And you can see how this evolution has happened pretty quickly. So in Q1 2022, you can see that half of the content on the feed was friends and people that you follow. There has been a massive shift, though, of how that has been evolving. So Facebook is obviously changing their algorithms very much in an AI-driven model. And you can see that they're now starting to break out this information between friends and people followed, and this friend reshare, where you're sharing content that might be valuable from your network. The big downside, though, is the reach from a page point of view. So you can see this massive drop in reach in terms of pages has gone pretty much halved from 16% to 8% of the content that's seen on your feed. And again, groups have also started to drop off. So this is something really worth noting, and also worth noting that they're also changing the way that links are working on the platform. So once upon a time, Facebook was going after all of the major publishing houses, and they wanted to be the first stop shop in terms of a publisher. And so they were promoting you to be able to use links as part of your content. And they wanted to be, the Sydney Morning Herald or The Age or the first place that you would get your news. Now, obviously, there's been massive backlash from the news organizations, and that's evolved. So you can see here this massive shift in terms of posts from pages followed. The number with a link is really only a very small proportion of the content that is seen on the platform. Where the big changes come, though, is this unconnected category. So yes, you can see here this massive drop off from pages and groups, a little bit of a change of the content that's seen from friends and people that have followed. But this massive opportunity really lies in this unconnected space. Let me explain that a little bit more. So Meta used to be about connections. And if you think about this, when we started, it was about inviting your friends into the platform, and I would invite my friends, and then you would target the like-minded audiences of people who might have liked wine or might have liked design or were interested in a very similar topic. And the assumption in the algorithms would be it was about this web of connections. Now that the internet is evolving and we've got more machine learning to be able to play with, we've seen that Zuckerberg is making the call that it is less about our friends and the way that we're connecting with our friends, and more about using the platforms as an AI discovery engine. And we got a bit worried about this for a while, and we're like, oh, what is this going to mean? But actually, when you think about it, this is exciting because it is shifting from being about those people that we know who may already know about our products. So, my mum is the #1 fan on most of our pages because she loves it and she comments and, she feels really involved in the community. But that doesn't mean that she is the target market that is going to buy. And they've looked at all of this machine learning that they've had and started to pump out the content very differently. So interestingly, the way that the algorithms are starting to evolve is more about this free friends reshare and unconnected content. And what this means is that content and developing great content becomes key. The way that they're helping us amplify that also starts to come from a paid strategy. So the platform with 9 billion users on it obviously is becoming cluttered, but this is where the pay to play piece comes in, because we still have the ability to be targeting that group of people who have interest-based targeting that allows us to still be targeted by location and some demographics. But we're going a little bit broader to help more people discover amazing content that exists on the platform. That doesn't mean that our custom audiences, so posting to family, friends, e-newsletter database, or people who are following the page, isn't available. But because of this wide sweeping privacy changes that are making it really difficult to get granular in terms of personalization from some of these metrics, they're going broader because they know that the landscape is evolving. So what I'd encourage you to think about is pay to play has an opportunity here. Still can very much use these custom audiences where we can upload our VIP buyers or our newsletter lists or target those people who are already engaged. But the platform with 9 billion consumers and so much machine learning is getting smarter at helping us to get to those people who might be interested in our brand and may not have otherwise discovered it. It's also worth noting that the attribution, and this is the results piece. So when we talk about attribution, this is from the point, for example, that an ad might have been served and the consumer has taken an action to where Facebook is recording that result can take up to 7 days, because you can see here in the back end, they use a 7-day click window. And this is different to the way that Google uses it. So what this means for us is we need to make sure that our budgets are stretching a little bit longer to make sure that we're seeing the results and optimizing and learning. We're also looking at Google because there's two pieces of the puzzle here. But if you're putting an ad out that only runs for 2 days, we don't know if that ad is running when Google reports on it a little bit differently to Facebook. So we've got to give ourselves budgets that allow us to stretch a little bit broader to see those results.
Yeah, so essentially just coming back to that 2-day example, we actually won't know the success of that campaign for another 5 days, because the 2 days plus 5 equals your 7-day attribution window. So essentially we need to be running campaigns probably for a minimum of 7 days. So that's just something to keep in mind, because Google can pick up data straight away. However, it does work off a last click. So what that means is if someone clicks on the Facebook ad and goes directly to the website, Google will track that as a result. So that's one result. Whereas Facebook will take those 7 days that you've seen the ad. So a consumer's seen the ad and then they might type in, oh, that's right, so-and-so has a new release, I'm going to go onto their website. And once they type in that email at that web address, Facebook picks that up as a result, because Facebook does its best to track the results of all its users, essentially.
Yeah, so something worth keeping in mind. And that's why we're looking at both platforms and we spend so much time optimizing some of the results. I think it's also worth thinking about where we're talking about organic versus paid. So organic social is when we put it up on the feed. And as you saw, the organic results are diminishing versus the paid piece where we promote it. And they have a very different role. And what we're seeing is some amazing content that is being generated that is still getting really good results in terms of organic reach. Not what it used to be. We used to see organic reach of 50 to 60% back in the day, but it's no longer like that. So this is where the different content types have got a different role. So the people behind the brand, building the relationships, building awareness. You can see some of that content that we put in our reporting works really hard in terms of, building that brand awareness. Now, if budgets were unlimited, you would also be amplifying that content because it is resonating and it's getting some really good results. So Organic social has a role in terms of a bit of a different play to where we're trying to target some of the page. And we think about this a bit differently. So your paid piece could be where you're targeting people traveling in the area, specific locations. So putting a pin over a bowling club and making sure that you're targeting very specific people in that area. They both have a role, but have to interrelate. And we do those pieces of the content pillars for very different reasons.
Yeah.
So just moving on of other trends that we're seeing, it's no surprise to you. We talk about it most months when we're developing content plans, is this importance of Reels. And Reels is that short form video content. You can see here that there's been a 50% increase on how these Reels are used from 6 months ago. And once again, they're being prioritized in the algorithm because this is the way that Meta is competing with, brands like TikTok. So again, it's a bit of a trend. It comes and goes. It may not be the case in 12 months' time, but this is an opportunity for us to grow reach and get out to a broader group of people by just understanding what consumers are looking for. It's also important to know that Instagram is still on the rise. So again, we used to talk about Instagram having a usage of about 1 to 2 million people in Australia. It's now sitting at about 4 million people. So again, this is why the big guys in terms of Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube are often the places that we play first because they do have the dominance in terms of how consumers are using them. So Mel's going to talk about how these platforms are evolving and some of the new tools to be aware of that are coming into the platforms.
Yeah, so essentially Meta does want to remain relevant. So they are introducing some new features. Now, one of those nifty features is if you've ever had the pleasure of being in the back end of Facebook, you will know that they change the way that you can schedule and upload probably every 6 to 10 months. And we have a new update that they will be most likely shifting from Creator Studio, which is the current scheduling tool, to Meta Business Suite. So it is a new tool to learn. It does look very different to Creator Studio. So this is what it essentially looks like. There are still glitches, but if you do go into Creator Studio, you'll probably notice there's a yellow pop-up to say that Creator Studio is on its way out. We have started testing to use it, and we are just trying to work our way through it to ensure that this platform still talks to our ads manager where we set up ads, because we have noticed some little issues there, but we'll continue to learn and just see how we can really be using that tool super hard. The other thing to keep in mind is that there is word that Facebook very much wants you to be using this Meta Business Suite compared to using third-party platforms such as Sked Social or Latergram, and they are penalizing some accounts for using tools that sit outside those. That sit outside Meta Business or Creator Studio, which is what we're currently using. So just something to keep in mind. The other thing that you may have seen that we put up in our social media maybe a couple weeks ago is that Facebook has introduced a blue tick verification. So you may be familiar with this from Instagram or Twitter, but essentially it's a blue tick to confirm that you are an authentic account. And often people will seek to have this blue tick because they may be at risk of being like fake accounts created around them and things like that. So just a few things with this blue tick to keep in mind. For the Facebook blue tick, and I believe the Instagram blue tick shortly, will actually be coming at a subscription. So you can pay to have it. It's no longer a free commodity that you can apply for. However, they have tried to caveat that cost by saying, look, we will give you support. We will have you placed in contact with someone from Facebook that if you have any issues, that you can talk to them. The other thing to keep in mind is at the moment for Facebook, they are only rolling this out for accounts that are linked to people. So for example, Trish could apply for one, but Mastermind Consulting could not. That's not to say that brands won't be able to apply for a blue tick on Facebook. I do assume that that will roll out eventually, but this is just something that they're testing at the moment to see if there is an uptake on that.
Yeah, in early days, and interestingly, Mari Smith, because this is only available at the moment in Australia and New Zealand, it hasn't rolled out to other countries yet. And she was talking about the benefits often being from a service point of view, but there's also been a whole lot of phishing and scams around this. So we're just watching. None of us are verified at the moment, but we are watching, because if it helps us get in contact with a Facebook support person that actually is helpful, then maybe it's worth $12.99 a month.
So the other new nifty feature that Facebook has rolled out is similar to what they did with the Instagram Reels rollout, is they have increased the length of how long a Facebook Reel can be. So they've increased that limit to 90 seconds. Other little features they've now included for Facebook are very similar to Instagram in terms of being preferred by the algorithm, number one. Number two, allowing you to use templates. So for example, you may have seen when watching some reels, there's a little icon that comes up in the bottom left-hand side that says use template. And essentially you can use the same audio and transitions from an existing reel. So that's another great way of being able to very easily jump on some different trends that are out there. Instagram is also trialing some new features, including notes, broadcast channels, and subscriptions. So if you're like, what does this even mean? So essentially, a paid subscription is the opportunity for you to offer to your fans or followers, email list, an opportunity to pay for extra content. So this could be some behind the scenes. It could be one-on-one Q&A time with someone within the business or family. So there's lots to learn from here. It is something that is only being tested at the moment. It hasn't rolled out across all channels. So if you're wondering why you don't have this feature, don't panic. It just hasn't come yet for your account. Other things are broadcast channels. So essentially, it's almost like having your inbox on social media, similar to that of your email inbox. So people can subscribe to your email that they will get on Instagram. So it's not through MailChimp or Campaign Monitor or anything like that. It's literally crafting the email or almost like a text message in Instagram that you can roll out to a subscription list. And then the other thing are notes, where it's almost like back in the day with Facebook, you used to be able to be like, I'm feeling happy today. You can essentially do that on Instagram for some accounts. So yeah, we've kind of touched on subscriptions. It may be an interesting one, particularly for some of our winery clients, if we're thinking about things like vintage, or if you're a business that's very hands-on with how you make your product, it could be a very interesting way of selling in more content. And then eventually, once you see if you do have that feature of being able to subscribe, we've put a little nifty screenshot here of what that would look like. So there's a subscribe button on your profile for people to subscribe. And then this is just an example of like what a broadcast channel would look like. So essentially, it's not an email with modules and images. It's literally like a text message. This could be really useful for things if you've got particular days that you go on sale and maybe it's only for 24 hours, particularly if we're seeing that a 7-day attribution window is where it's at with Facebook. This could be something that's worthwhile testing in the future. So this then kind of moves on to, we've had a look at what's working well, what the current social media landscape is, how these different little tools that are coming out, but what are the actual top trends that we're seeing for 2023? So the first trend that we're seeing is about posting quality over quantity, and with the caveat of adding in some ad spend. So we should be focusing on content that is very relevant for our existing community. And if it's not, we need to consider what that would look like. So maybe that's running some dark or blind posts where it doesn't appear on the feed, but it appears in the atmosphere of metaverse. So I just want to quickly play this video from Adam Mosseri, who is the head of Instagram, where he talks about how often you should be posting and gives a little tips about a couple tips about video content as well.
But I do think one of the most important things is to experiment, is to try new things and figure out what's resonating with your audience now, because it might be different than it was a half a year or a year ago. There are other broad things. I think leaning into video is good. Videos need to be catching the first, 2 seconds to get people's attention as they scroll by and feed, and that's good. Using hashtags is valuable. A healthy, feed, a couple feeds a week, a couple stories a day.
So essentially the key takeouts there is that your video needs to be engaging within the first 2 seconds. So there's a challenge for you. And secondly, we should only be looking at posting 1 to twice a week, and the rest of the content should most likely sit in stories, where we should be looking at potentially maybe 2 stories a day. So in terms of, just to reinforce that message, what causes a consumer to unfollow a brand? The biggest things are irrelevant content. So maybe if majority of your audience are based in Sydney, but you are an Adelaide brand, talking about Adelaide is not going to be relevant to your Sydney community. So again, just thinking about what does that then mean for your strategy for social media? Having too many ads or posting too much. Again, they don't want to be bombarded with messaging. So keeping it to quality over quantity is essential. Trend 2 is video, which I don't think comes as any surprise.
It's almost not a trend.
It's almost not a trend. It's almost like, why aren't we doing it? So video, if it's not part of your social media marketing mix right now, then I suggest the first thing you do after this call is go out and get some video content happening, because it is sink or swim. And if you are not doing video content, you will sink. Like it is straight as that. We need to think about how big Reels are becoming. They are the biggest growing piece of content on social media. We've said that video content, whether it's Reels, whether it's behind the scenes, whether it is Facebook Lives, these are all very important pieces of material. And just to further emphasize that piece is actually when we look at Reels and short format video, think about YouTube. YouTube is the best platform to watch long format video. However, as a long format video channel, they also recognize the need to include an offering similar to Reels or TikTok videos. And that is why they have brought in YouTube Shorts. So essentially what we're saying is shorter is better, but YouTube is where you want to play, which we will talk more about the benefits of YouTube later on in this webinar. But YouTube is important for long format. But if they recognize the beauty of short format, you do as well. So in terms of engagement, looking at the number of followers, this is just a good indication of whether or not this is a successful reel or maybe less so. So keeping in mind, engagement rate should include the number of video views a video receives. So if you've got less than 5,000 followers, your engagement rate should be sitting just below 4%. However, if you have over 50,000 followers, say, it's pretty much half of that. So that's just really something to keep in mind. The other thing that I thought was really interesting to see, who is consuming those reels. And whilst you might think it might be the teeny boppers who are getting home from school and scrolling through their phone, that's not necessarily the case. It's that 18 to 34-year-old demographic that are consuming this content. And a lot of the feedback we do get from some of our clients is, how do I engage a younger customer? I'm not saying an 18-year-old might be useful for your business, but I can bet that probably that 28 to 35-year-old is somewhere that you want to be playing in. So again, it just re-emphasizes why we need to be playing with reels. This sort of just re-emphasizes what I've already said. When we look at the most engaging types of video, short form sits at the very top, whereas you can see long form is third from the bottom. So we really need to think about how we're selling in messages. And I know there's probably a lot of amazing videos that you want to share and stories you want to share, but it's about getting clever and seeing how you can bring that down to a 60-second video, or even better, 10 seconds. So I've touched on shorts before. These are organic videos that are actually getting suggested on YouTube homepages for YouTube users. So similar to Facebook, it is about that discovery and how shorter videos are helping brands get discovered. Now, if you're worried about, oh my goodness, I now need to go out and create content for Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Pinterest, do not stress. You can be repurposing content. So there's a prime example here from this Madeline Olivia. She's a very big UK YouTuber, and she's noticed the power of short format videos. So she's very much utilizing Reels, TikTok, and YouTube Shorts, and she's using the exact same video and getting strong engagement across all platforms. So do feel confident in knowing that you can be repurposing content across channels. The other little trend that we are seeing amongst video is edutainment. And what that means is sharing how-to videos. Consumers are very interested to learn about, in this example, how to grow pumpkins vertically. Okay, like maybe that's not of interest to you, but there would be something that your customer is interested in. So if you could go through like frequently asked questions, or if there's a really interesting question you get in via email or via the inbox that's worthwhile explaining in a video, jump on it and give it a go. Let's see what these how-to videos could get for you. There are also content that can be turned into blogs, and we can pop those videos into the blogs as well. And again, it's just another example of repurposing your content.
It's like me.
So trend 3. So UGC, which is user-generated content creators and influencers, are playing a key role in your content creation as well as your marketing. So there is a difference between the three. So UGC, which I'm just going to call it UGC, user-generated content, your unpaid types of content. So it's when people just happen to tag you because they're enjoying your product over the weekend and they just want to share with their friends and family and give that recommendation. Then you've got creators. So these are people who may not necessarily have a huge following, but it's cheaper than potentially paying for a photo shoot, for example. So you may want to send out some product to get some beautiful content. They will not have any influence on their community. They just create beautiful branded content. Finally, you have influencers, and it's in the name. These people provide influence. They're often paid. They work better if you're working with them on a longer term arrangement. So not just a one-off set and forget, they get the product once, that's it. Working with them multiple times throughout the year will keep their followers engaged and keep your brand top of mind. So here's just an example of what this could look like from a protein powder brand called Mastermind. So they've shared a UGC post. It's not the most amazing or thought-provoking image, but it's just a keen example of an everyday person just sharing their experience with the brand. Then you've got a content creator who has less of a following, but she looks what the protein powder wants to sell, great physique, beautiful skin. It's exactly what we want. Then you've got the influencer piece. So this is Hayley Connor. So they've used her multiple times throughout the year to talk about their different protein powders, whether it's Halloween, their Black Friday sale, or just their everyday range. So it's just thinking about different ways that we can be using one, two, or all three of these categories. So just keeping in mind with UGC, that does include sending out product to your top fans. Like you can send out products to your number one purchasers and encourage them to share their experiences on social media. When we look at influencers, however, there is a bit of a disparity between following. So we have nano versus macro. So a nano influencer is that to 0 to 10,000 following, and then that macro is anything over 500,000. So what would be best for you? Obviously, that comes at a brand by brand basis and what your objective is. But some key things to keep in mind is a nano influencer will most likely have a more engaged audience because their audience size is smaller. They will be a lot more cost effective to work with. They will probably be more open to gifted rather than paid collaborations. And they may have actually better reach potentially if you were able to get those insights from them. A macro influencer, however, is probably more in that celebrity space. So they're going to cost a lot of money. Their engagement may not necessarily be as high because of how big their following is. Just because they have a huge following does not equate to better engagement. It's usually often the opposite. The other way that you can work around this is, say you wanted a target of reaching 100,000 people. You could work with a series of nano influencers or content creators to reach that benchmark. So there's other ways that we can work around that. So in terms of UGC, just coming back to why would we want to send product to our top customers if they're going to buy anyway? It's to A, keep them happy, but B, when you look at this, what type of content actually impacts purchase? It is that user-generated content. It is that content that someone's best friend is saying, you need to try this product because I love it. It's that sort of messaging that is helping with some of that decision-making. The other thing to keep in mind, and this is where Mastermind can help, is that sending out product to influencers, content creators, UGC, whatever it may be, is it's not a set and forget approach, because blunders happen. ACCC is cracking down on influencers, and that can be things as not including the hashtag ad, giving false information. So there's a prime example here of Kim K giving out some advice on some medication that the FDA in America pulled her up on, and she had to go back and renege on what she had said. However, unfortunately in Australia, if that was to happen with the ACCC, it is not just the influencer who is liable, it is also the brand. So we have to be really mindful with what we're communicating to them to ensure that we're getting kosher quality content. The other thing is ensuring that we're actually working with people who would be interested in your brand and aren't doing it for the free product or for money. So there's a good example here of Scott Disick just copy and pasting what was sent to him in an email of what to say. This is obviously not best practice. And this is something that Mastermind is definitely getting into understanding the niche of, and really offering that service, because we can help maintain those relationships and monitor. The following trend that we want to talk about is brand collaborations. Now, whilst this might not be social media specific, it can still relate back to socials. So we need to think about what this means. Now, brand collaborations doesn't have to be some huge scale thing for big brands only. It's not about Nike partnering with Disney. It's about local businesses partnering together. It's about like-minded brands partnering together. So a couple of examples here are actually probably the opposite of that. These are not like-minded brands partnering, but 19 Crimes took it upon themselves to reach out to Martha Stewart and Snoop Dogg and do a collaboration with them. So it's a very tongue-in-cheek campaign, and obviously it's not appropriate for everyone. But another example would be looking at Messina Gelato partnering with Lano Lips to bring out some gelato-inspired flavored lip balms. So again, it's the sky's the limit when it comes to collaborations, but it's something we definitely like to explore with some of our clients this year. In terms of keyword search and SEO, this is actually now having an impact on social media. There's actually a lot of people who are now using social media as a tool over Google. I don't know if anyone on the call has done this, but I certainly have. When I'm planning for a holiday, I will often look up on Instagram over Google, best places to eat, best places to visit, best places to stay. And what Instagram is now doing is similar to that of Google. It's picking up those keyword searches, and whether that's in hashtags, the copy, the file names on photos, these are all important things, including location tags. All of that is becoming really important. And therefore, when we're doing content plans, they do take longer to create because we are considering all of these different searchability issues that we need to actually overcome and make sure that we're giving the content its best chance of being seen by the social media community. So I know that's probably a lot to kind of take on, and there's probably little bits of nuggets there that you're very keen to talk about and pursue, and we're open to having those conversations with you guys. But essentially what I want you to take from social media is, yes, there are changes coming. Yes, there are new trends that maybe you're not currently utilizing, but coming back to the beginning of the presentation, there's probably quite a lot that you are already doing. So just keep that in mind. So Trish touched on other platforms in terms of there's probably 7 different platforms that each social media person is using. And what we need to remember from that is, well, then if there's 7, that's obviously more than Facebook and Instagram. So we would highly suggest that moving into 2023 that we start dabbling in YouTube. YouTube is the 2nd highest visited website worldwide, just after Google. And it's because YouTube can also be SEO optimized with the little description box that sits underneath the video. So a bit more on YouTube. Coming back to that whole thing of repurposing content, we can be using longer format videos to tell stories, to take those longer format videos and put them into blogs, to include them into email sendouts, to use them in print collateral with QR codes that takes you straight to the YouTube video. YouTube has such huge capabilities and lots of opportunities to really be able to leverage yourselves in different ways of being reached, different ways of you being able to reach people that you want to be talking to. We should also be repurposing some of those Instagram Reels content if we are already doing them. Let's test putting some of that on YouTube Shorts and seeing what sort of results we can get from there. That is not to say that YouTube should be replacing uploading video to Facebook and Instagram. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that YouTube should be considered as part of your social media strategy moving into 2023. So a little bit on TikTok. We won't dwell on this too much just because there is a lot of up in the airness on the media about whether or not TikTok will be banned from Australia. And if you're not too familiar about why, not to get into politics, just Google it and you can enlighten yourself as to why it may be banned. So essentially, it is continuing to be on the rise. It is one of the fastest growing channels, just shy after Facebook. So there are a lot of people using that content. However, we would suggest that for our brands that do have wine or alcohol, this may not be best practice for you because there isn't necessarily a way for us to A, get that content over the line, but B, there is issues with making sure that minors are not seeing that content. Now, I know TikTok, you may think it's all about trending dance videos. It's not necessarily like that at all. Just the same with Instagram Reels, it is an opportunity to educate in short, sharp video content. So there is a little bit in here about those ban changes that are coming. There is a chance it will go ahead. There's a lot of government employees who actually can't have TikTok on their phone due to being tracked by other countries. The other channel that we touched on before was Pinterest. So we have seen some success with Pinterest, particularly for blog content, maybe less so product focused, but there's definitely scope here for tourism and visitation. There is coming soon to Pinterest the availability to test video ads. And again, it's just re-emphasizing that video is the way of the future. In terms of LinkedIn, we're not saying that you should be jumping onto LinkedIn and sharing your new release. It's more of a channel that really gives you the opportunity, potentially as a business owner, to really cement yourself on this platform as an expert in your field. It gives you an opportunity to make connections, potentially assist you with getting your products listed into shops, restaurants, bars, pubs, that sort of thing. So there is scope here for LinkedIn. I feel like Trish probably has a bit more to say about LinkedIn, being a business owner herself. But there's definitely scope here that we should be testing a few more things on LinkedIn, particularly from a personal profile perspective and less so brand.
Yeah, and I do see, I know a lot of our clients are on LinkedIn and commenting on clients and commenting on different trends that they're seeing or local events or publishing things. I do see with all my own social, I get more traction from LinkedIn than any other platform. So it isn't just a job platform. The jobs is just one piece of it, but they've really done a good job of moving the job piece to the side. I use it for professional kind of networking. I find the content that is on there is really relevant and much more business orientated. So there's some really good groups and communities, and I find the reach that I get just spending, probably 10 minutes a day on my phone, just flicking through LinkedIn is a really valuable use of time.
Yeah. And then finally, we want to touch on Twitter. There's not too much that we want to say about this. It's just more so something to keep top of mind, particularly if you want to start engaging with, say, media or journalists. This is probably the best channel to have those conversations, besides LinkedIn, obviously, but Twitter does have a place from that perspective. It's not going to probably help you sell through your products or drive visitation, but it's definitely another tool that you can use for building relationships.
But obviously with what Elon Musk is doing with Twitter, there's also a lot of uncertainty of how the platform is working.
Yeah, so just a quick little note on ABAC code. Now that we've kind of gone through the trends and other platforms to keep in mind, the other thing that we want to remain top of mind for you is that there are still issues with ABAC code breaches and people thinking that they're doing the right thing and they're not, whether it's sharing a meme about getting to Friday and downing a bottle of wine, for example, that's just not going to cut it. And the other thing to keep in mind, coming back to that influencer piece, is not only is the influencer liable, but so is the brand.
Yeah, and we're seeing more and more breaches of ABAC. So we're kind of taking a very conservative approach here as best practice, but it may be funny, but again, you also don't want to get the fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Fabulous. All right. Thanks, Mel. There's a lot to absorb there. I guess the question we touched on as part of our trends webinar last month was around the role of social in selling. And we talked about social media being there to build relationships and being more top of the funnel. I just wanted to take that just a little bit further with this McKinsey model. And those of you who, heard me speak about this at conferences, it's not new, but I think it's a different way of thinking about how social works as a trigger. So the awareness funnel for marketing is not always linear in terms of awareness, consideration, purchase. And from time to time, there can be a trigger that helps to get a brand into your initial consideration set. So I'll give you an example. Merry Boots is my favorite gum boots. I know many of you also wear them. Flicking through the Instagram feed, I had no intention of buying another pair of Merry Boots. But bang, a trigger comes up with the new boot colors, just needed to have them for winter. That is a trigger that helps take me make action with that moment of purchase. So keep in mind, social sometimes can help be that trigger point when you're not necessarily looking from that linear funnel perspective of moving consumers from awareness to consideration to purchase. Occasionally, this could be the prompt that you're out in the vineyards and they see this amazing story about your Riesling and they realize that they've run out. And this could be the trigger, or that they see a beautiful piece of packaging, or they see a beautiful activity happening at the local bolo that they go, oh, that would be a perfect place for a birthday party. They could be the moments of consideration that moves that funnel in a very different way. So we're thinking about that as part of the consideration set. It's also worth thinking about this research that's just yet to be published from Social Media Marketing World. So this was published last week at the conference, but not yet released in a report. And this is a really broad group of marketers globally talking about what platform in social media is most helping to improve sales. And you can see here, this is where Facebook and Instagram play a really strong role. I would argue for a B2B audience, that's why LinkedIn plays so prevalently here. It is more important than Facebook and Instagram from a B2B marketing point of view, but worth keeping in mind. Equally, you can see here in terms of exposure, it's a little bit of a different perspective. So Instagram and YouTube play a bit of a different role in terms of awareness and exposure, but not necessarily that role of converting into sales. So more on that is coming. They're expecting the report to be published within the next 4 weeks. So again, we'll share that and we'll put it up on our socials and our LinkedIn, just to make sure that you've got that latest information. So lots we've covered here. We talked in the trends webinar about where the future is heading. And we talked a little bit about AI, and we talked about NFTs and a lot of the ways that the bigger brands were kind of taking this forward. I just want to touch on 2 things before we wrap up the kind of implications for you to think about. The first one of these future-proofing is coming from Adam Mosseri, who is the head of Instagram. And he was making the point that the power is shifting away from platforms more to being content creators. So again, they're giving a few little signs that the platforms may not be as important as the content creators, and even more reason why we need to start building and nurturing some of those relationships a little bit differently. ChatGPT also has been the buzzword of the year. I think, 2023, this will be one of the buzzwords, just like pandemic and pivot has been over the last couple of years. But when you consider ChatGPT has gained 100 million users in the last 60 days, This is definitely a trend to be able to be aware of, and it taps into the way that the algorithms are working, and also to the way that we kind of continue to be able to optimize our content. I thought this was a really good example, the way that they explained it at Social Media Marketing World. They talked about the advent of some of the things like Photoshop back in 1987. And at the time, there was a massive uproar that this would kill design and kill photography. And yet here we are in 2023. You know, Adobe Photoshop is showing that obviously this tool and these ability to kind of leverage the technology is meaning that we're able to get greater creative results. The same thing can be thought about with ChatGPT, and no question about the fact that there's a lot of, things that are still irrelevant and being evolved. But if we think about this as a tool to be able to look at some of the machine learning with the algorithms, to be able to write copy on our sales pages that really takes into consideration some of the information that we know about the consumers, or tests different ad copy like Jasper does. So there's lots of tools that we're playing within the back end that are not replacing what we're doing with the social media marketing and the content marketing, but they're helping to inform and better refine. And we're really excited about where this is heading in the future. So don't get scared about conversations of AI and ChatGPT. If you kind of think about it like a car that continues to evolve to get more efficiency, that's kind of the way that some of this technology is evolving. All right, so just kind of wrapping up and giving you some food for thought. There's a lot we've given you in terms of trends. We've given you platform changes. We've given you new considerations of different ways to do your social differently. But what do you now do and take away for your marketing? And what are the things we're going to talk to you about as to how social media will evolve? I think the very first thing to consider is the role of social in the broader digital ecosystem. So if you are only on social media and you're not looking at your website and you're not looking at your email marketing, this isn't going to work as effectively because it's an integrated ecosystem. And social often will play a really important role in that discovery phase and that awareness phase and driving traffic, but it doesn't replace the ability to have a really strong ecosystem. Your emails still need to work really hard. So sometimes less is more, and cutting back on the way that we do social sometimes will give us a bit more opportunity to focus on other parts of the mix. I loved this saying from Mari Smith at the conference last week. She talked about the fact that technology is moving at a warp speed and is continuing to evolving. But just like what we went back to the heart of it, the reason why we are doing social media in the first place is that consumers have that need to be able to connect and to discover and to learn and to be entertained. So fundamentally, these are platforms that are changing, but the essence of what we're trying to do to connect to consumers and get them to have an affiliation with our brand has not really changed at all. It does mean that we need to think a lot more about community management. So we're seeing this being more critical, especially given people are using direct messages and they've got Instagram chats and they've got, comments on different platforms. How you build your community is also attributed to how active you are in that community. And I know it's time consuming, we struggle with it as well as a business, but those direct messages, those personal connections, those little small touches to show the consumer that you care is what is going to set you apart from your competition. And we saw it an example last night. We we're in Coonawarra last week and we were in Celador filming, and there were some influencers that came in, and we've been maintaining the dialogue with them ever since. Not for anything like, can we get some content? But if they're editing that content and they're thinking about their experiences, the Celadors that they visited that feel really personal and helpful and really involved in their journey are the ones that they're going to spread more love around and continue to give you that word of mouth referral. So don't be at the mercy of the algorithms. Don't feel like you have to just keep posting and posting to be able to get results. The organic results that many of our clients are seeing are still exceptional in an ecosystem when you're tiny little brands that are paying against the big guys. But focus about quality over quantity. And we often talk about one of my favorite marketers, Seth Godin, and he's talking about having utility for the consumer and being valuable to the consumer. We're asking you to think about, when you're briefing us on content, is this going to have value to the consumer? Or is this just relevant to us as a brand? Because we know that the attention spans of our consumers often is under 8 seconds when they're scrolling. So we need the content to be remarkable, useful, or engaging to be able to stop them. So when we're coming up with our content plans and we're thinking about that framework, it's often about thinking about how we can be efficient. So being able to plan this in advance and potentially come up with 2 months worth of content, or run a day's photo shoot where we can plan different types of content rather than receiving ad hoc pieces of content, will allow us to do much better results. So if you think about how much Mel's just talked about in terms of scheduling and cropping and going back in, there is so much more efficiencies that the team can get by thinking about this in a more strategic perspective and uploading some of this content rather than going in one by one from a post perspective. We just can't operate that way given how much content is evolving. It used to be different when we were going, right, we need 2 posts a week and they need to be just visuals and they need to be photos, and we could do that a little bit differently. Now we're editing videos, we're putting subtitles on, we're thinking about alt text, we're researching in SEMrush as to what content is getting the best results. So there's so much more strategic work that goes on behind the scenes that we need to partner with you to give those great results. We also need to think about this from the consumer, and this again came from social media marketing world. Thinking about what makes people love certain pieces of content, and that's often education, entertainment, or both. It often can be something that's super cool and creative. So sometimes it can be just those small things like a little bit of animation or a little bit of movement, just helps things stand out in the feed. But equally, that authenticity and that great energy, being able to go into a video and make it like those first 2 seconds ready for someone to watch, is what is going to keep driving that engagement. We're also seeing that the feed is evolving and needs to happen in a very different way. So once upon a time, we used to think about how the grid used to work and how that evolves. That's now started to evolve, where consumers are often trapped in the scrolling of a story or the reels that they get into. So strategically, we need to think about what sits on the feed to give you a beautiful brand piece, because sometimes if a brand is being discovered, it is still those first 6 to 9 pieces of content that consumers will look at. But then you can go deeper with your stories and your reels that are probably more important, and some pieces of content could be put up on a story, give that information, sometimes be seen just as much as it does on the feed. So very different roles as to how they kind of are formulated. And importantly, you guys do such a great job. We love being able to be out there with you in the field and in your businesses about that authenticity. That is what your consumers love. And often this is the part that the big brands don't do, that differentiates the small guys that are really playing hard in this space. You know, Mel talked about the things that we're working with, the people, the stories, the tips, the, Throwback Thursdays. That is not by coincidence. We're recommending those sorts of elements go into your plans because they're real, authentic, and they build trust. So continuing to put your people at the forefront and thinking about how you're genuinely telling those stories is what will differentiate your brand and make consumers loyal. We also need to keep thinking about video content creation. And this isn't just saying it's a reel or a YouTube thing. Video is the medium that consumers across all age groups are looking at. So yes, it costs more to be able to produce and more to be able to edit, but we've got to work out our video strategies to work harder. And some of our clients are doing a phenomenal job of creating this content on their iPhones and using that to entertain and inform. So something that we will continue to push and recommend because it's playing across all the platforms. But equally, it's worth recognizing that it is pay to play. And as Mel talked about when she talked about that 7-day attribution window, we've got to be able to be smart about how we're using our paid strategies. We know that paid is an opportunity for some of the smaller brands, and we know that some of the bigger brands are moving to retail media and they're moving their money elsewhere. But for brands that are small, and this is a really important way of engaging with their consumers, you have to recognize that we need to be using this money to be able to get the best results. And there's some exceptional results that we're seeing, but you have to be able to test, trial, and optimize to give you those results. Sometimes just putting a little bit of money and not letting it learn is almost inefficient and not as effective. So you'll see us do things like rolling up campaigns and potentially putting 3 different tourism campaigns under one different campaign. That's to let the algorithms play with that learnings a little bit further to see what results can be generated. We also want to start to move away from Meta, and Meta being Facebook and Instagram. Now, recognize that they have a role, and we know that for many of our clients, it still drives the most traffic. It still drives the most sales. It still plays a really valuable role. But we will caution you and continue to say, do not build your house on foreign soil, that there's other things we need to start dabbling with alongside of our owned assets. So the things that we can control. It could be that we're starting to play a bit more with YouTube or testing out a little bit with Pinterest. We have to think about some of those niche audiences and how we play. And importantly, this whole plan and measurement. So, many of you know that we sit down and we look at the grid and we'll use our whiteboard and we'll use those post-it notes to be able to come up with the content pillars. A lot of thought goes into the content planning before we send it for sign off, probably a good 4 hours worth of work, collaboration, copy. Is this word going to give us a better result than the next word? The little things can often make a difference. And again, this comes back to thinking about how do we capture some content at scale? And we're seeing some really good results from planning that content, allowing us to capture it over a couple of days, and then drip feeding this out into the algorithms. But it's also worth recognizing that this landscape is evolving at a super rapid rate. And so these algorithms are hungry, and content is obviously a bit of a machine to be able to think about creating things that are resonating. So being able to measure, test, optimize, and evolve is really important. Now, finally, Mel talked about the role of influencers. We're not talking about going after Cristiano Ronaldo or Justin Bieber. There is a massive trend to using influencers. And for many of you, whether you're running, a venue, or you're running a winery or a food outlet or a restaurant or a cafe, there's lots of opportunities to use these influencers and extend the reach of your messages through public relations. It is a massive trend that we touched on last time. It's why Emma in our team, is in charge of communications, PR, and influencers, because it's requiring a different skill set to be able to bring this about. And, Mel and Loz are content creators / influencers yourselves. So they're seeing some of this, they're seeing what other brands are doing and considering the role of how this works in your marketing. Finally, really important to be measuring, but often thinking about the fact that measurements will be different. So sometimes a video view is just as important as a like. don't get hung up by the vanity metrics, because the vanity metrics are changing. And if we think about Facebook and Instagram moving away from just being about your family and friends, of course, we're going to see a change in engagement. So again, this is about being smart, about measuring. Google Analytics obviously have got changes with GA4 coming on board. So understanding where the role of this comes from and how it converts is equally pretty important. And finally, we're thinking about the fact that you're not here alone. Like, our team are living and breathing this every day. So whilst this is a lot for you guys to be able to take on board, you know, the team are looking at this every day. We're looking at trends, we're testing things, we're evolving. We really want to help you understand how we can partner with you to get some of the great results. So that's, you know, sometimes it's about training you. Sometimes it's about making sure your team is skilled up and equipped to help us create content. But we're also thinking about social as a little part of a bigger digital ecosystem. So sometimes there's a bigger piece at play that we're thinking about. How do we roll this into a bigger piece in your marketing mix to help you drive results? So I think we're pretty close. I guess if there's any questions, let's open up, but I appreciate it's taken us a lot of content here to go through. So equally happy to be able to answer any questions that you might have over email, or give us a call, or we can capture some of that in our regular work in progress sessions. Doesn't look like we've got any, Mel. Hopefully that means
we've explained ourselves well.
Hopefully. But if you do have any questions, we really appreciate you joining us today. We know that there's been a lot to take you through, but the goal very much has been to be able to help you understand a little bit more about how this landscape is evolving. I reiterate the point that don't be scared about all of these changes. It may seem overwhelming, but there's lots of exciting opportunities for you to consider. How do we evolve this as part of our marketing mix? We'll continue to share on our own social platforms any of these new pieces of information, but thank you for joining us, and yeah, have a great day.
See you later.